Last night, Ohio U.S. Senator J.D. Vance and Governor of Minnesota Tim Walz met for their first and quite possibly only vice presidential debate in this hugely consequential 2024 presidential election. I'm Tim Darnell. Thanks for joining us for this edition of Political Update here on Atlanta News First, broadcasting from our Midtown Atlanta studios. And we're joined for this post-vice presidential debate analysis and wrap up by one of our favorite people to talk with, to talk politics, or really about anything in Georgia, Dr. Charles Bullock, Dean of Georgia's Political Science Professorial Community at University of Georgia. Dr. Bullock, great to see you. Tell us what you thought and what you heard and what you gleaned from last night's vice presidential debate.
One thing, Tim, that really struck me is that it sounded a lot like politics used to be. And by that I mean, yes, the two speakers disagreed, but they weren't disagreeable to one another. And so many times one would turn to the other and say, well, I agree with what you said about this, but, and then they go on and say, this is a problem. We agree on that, but my party's ideas about how to address that problem, yeah, we don't agree with what you say about that. And that's the way politics used to be, that you could disagree without being disagreeable. I don't think a single name was called there. No one's background was impugned. It was, as I say, it was the way politics used to be, that you could really just talk about your disagreements over solutions, but agree that yeah, there are things which are challenging us, and we as a nation need to address those. And here, voters, are two options, and you voters make up your mind which way you think we should go as we try to address this concern.
It was ironic because I was thinking the same thing as we were watching it, and it was just so coincidental that this debate happened on the 100th birthday of former President Carter. And I remember the Carter-Reagan debates and the Carter-Ford debate in 1976, and also in 1984, when President Reagan and Walter Mondale debated. They were very cordial. They referred to each other as my esteemed colleague from across the aisle. And it was almost ironic, sort of serendipitous, that this kind of approach happened last night on the occasion of former President Carter's 100th birthday.
And it occurred to me that is a good point. Yes, it is really was kind of a throwback. And yeah, I like to be positive and hope that maybe we will see more of that rather than the bluster and personal attacks that have become so common in American politics now.
So moving forward, will this debate affect anything going on in Georgia? We're seeing poll after poll saying the race is too close to call. I believe on Tuesday, we saw a Quinnipiac poll showing Donald Trump having about a 5 or 6 point lead over Vice President Harris in Georgia. Did this debate do anything to further the goals of either campaign here in Georgia or across the nation?
It's not likely that it did, no. Probably didn't. I haven't seen the figures, but I'm sure it had far less of a video audience than the presidential debate had 5 weeks ago, whenever it was. So it probably won't, because these really are the understudies. And while, yes, there's always the potential that something might happen to the leader and the vice president have to take over, that's not a major factor in the way people go about voting for these tickets. And so, indeed, what these two individuals were doing in part was laying out, here is what my party would do on this issue, that issue. And so to the extent that that educated some people in terms of, I wonder where the party stood on these, that might then have some impact. But in terms of voting for a ticket because you liked J.D. Vance or Tim Walz, that's probably not going to be a factor.
The issue of abortion and reproductive issues came up during the debate with both candidates commenting on a recent abortion-related fatality that happened
Right.
with a particular, it was a very unfortunate situation. Does the issue of abortion resonate among undecided voters here in Georgia?
Yeah, it seems to, right. Now, it is not up at the level of the economy, however you define that, inflation or jobs or whatever, or of immigration. But yes, there's usually somewhere 6 to 10 percentage point of folks who say that that is going to be the most important issue for them. And here, kind of connecting things, yesterday there was a decision by a Fulton County judge, which essentially strikes down Georgia's limitation to 6 weeks, after which one becomes very difficult to get an abortion. So, had that ruling come down at some point in the past, then these two Georgia women who the hearings held by John Ossoff suggest died as a result of being able to get the kind of health care they needed might still be alive.
In terms of immigration and the economy, we'll talk about both of those together. Georgia obviously has a very large immigrant population. Metro Atlanta is expanding, with more and more immigrants, legal, undocumented, what have you. No one really has a solid handle on that. How is that issue affecting the economy here in Georgia? How are those two issues interrelated? As we have advanced voting starting in a week and a half. How will that play out?
Yeah, from J.D. Vance last night, we heard a lot about problems he attributed to immigration. He said that, he said this is a major reason we have a housing shortage, that immigrants are taking housing. And then also a more common theme from Republicans is that immigrants may be taking jobs that otherwise native-born Americans would have, and that would be another problem. And then a third problem also attributed to immigration is it may be putting pressures upon school systems and upon social welfare programs. What we didn't hear last night, but I think what a Democrat would respond to and say, yes, but we actually need those workers, particularly in a growing economy like Georgia has, that there are a number of jobs which you find it's very difficult to get native-born Americans to do. For example, harvesting the crops. Most Americans don't want to do that. And so we in Georgia had an experience. I forget how many years ago it was, probably more than 10 years ago, when we passed a new limitation here, which made it less attractive for immigrants to be here. And the farmers in South Georgia were screaming, we can't get the crops out of the field. We're losing our livelihood because they're rotting here. So there are certainly positive elements for an economy to have workers to fill jobs. And still in Georgia, we see many, many signs saying now hiring. And so in terms of Georgia's economy, yeah, it doesn't appear that we are suffering because of being overrun with immigrants, and we maybe need more to fill jobs.
Talking about the electoral process itself, a week and a half ago, the Georgia State Elections Board passed a rule requiring counties to hand count ballots on election night. The Georgia Democratic Party, with the support of the Harris Walz campaign, filed a lawsuit very recently challenging that. How do you see this issue playing out? And I asked this question about it to a representative from Common Cause Georgia during last week's political update, just asking straightforward, what is so controversial and what is such a big deal about hand counting ballots on election night?
Yeah, I happened to be at a meeting yesterday where the elections director in Oconee County, where I live, made a presentation, and she talked about this. And of course, what she says is it's going to take a while, and we have some very small precincts here in this county. When I'm assigned to is very small. It wouldn't take you a whole long time to count the ballots in that precinct. But in major urban areas where you have precincts with lots and lots of voters, then it could clearly take a while. Now, again, the expectation is that most of us Georgians are going to vote early, either probably voting early in person. It'll be maybe 5 or 6% that'll use absentee ballots. So that may mean there won't be that many ballots that'll have to be counted. But where it could really begin to take time is if you do have a large turnout. You've got workers who've been there for at least 12 hours, maybe 14 hours. They may be elderly. And what if they miscount them the first time? Then you got to go through it and do it a second time. So really, the potential effect of this would be to delay the time in which the ballots are then transported to the central processing area, where they would then be counted in terms of votes for Trump, votes for Harris. Because they aren't doing that at the precincts. They're simply going through and saying 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. How many do we have here? So, Georgia is not among the first states to get its results in, and this will not expedite that. So there will be a lot of eyes on Georgia because we are one of the 7 toss-up states. So if Georgia is still out there waiting, well, what's Georgia going to do? Maybe even impacts the point at which the networks start calling the presidency for one of the 2 candidates.
Vice President Kamala Harris is in Georgia today, touring damaged areas by Hurricane Helene. J.D. Vance is scheduled to be in suburban Metro Atlanta later this week. We've already seen a number of very high-profile visits from all 4 candidates on both sides of the aisle for president, vice president. Do you think we'll see more between now and November 5th?
I think we will. Yeah, we're one of those 7 states, so we're going to see the candidates themselves, potentially family members, surrogates will be coming to Georgia, unless the trend, which seems to be that Trump is gradually pulling ahead in Georgia. If that continues, then it's possible that we may not be seen as being that critical, in which case then attention would be going more to the states where the margins are narrow within the polling.
Wrapping up this edition of Political Update here on Atlanta News First with Dr. Charles Bullock, University of Georgia, Dean of Political Science Professors here in the state, the Southeast, and I'll arguably say the nation as well. Last night, J.D. Vance, Tim Walz debate. We will have either a President Donald Trump or a President Kamala Harris. 4 years from now, do you foresee a Tim Walz for president campaign or a J.D. Vance for president campaign? If so, did either of those gentlemen do anything to set themselves up for future political campaigns 4 years from now?
Well, yeah, whether Trump wins or loses, he can do 1 term and he'll have to step aside. So yes, there'll be an open slot then on the Republican side, and J.D. Vance, as if he's serving as the vice president, would certainly be in the mix there. And even if his ticket loses, I think he would be one of those candidates. So yes, I very much see that for him. He's only 40 years old now, so he's still a young man. Tim Walz, if his team wins, then he would probably be on the ticket again then in 2028, at which point into that he would be 68. We see that's no longer too old to be president, but it is getting towards the upper limit. So I think his future as a presidential candidate would be less likely, where Walz, I would be very surprised if he doesn't run for president in the future.
Well, Georgia is the most important state in the union. Right now, we're one of several battleground states where the race for the White House this year will be decided. Thanks to Dr. Charles Bullock of the University of Georgia, and thanks to all of you for watching and listening to this edition of Political Update on Atlanta News First. Our Political Update streams on all of our streaming platforms every Wednesday at 1:30 p.m. You can also catch every edition of Political Update wherever you get your podcasts, be it Amazon, Apple Music, Spotify, or your favorite podcasting platform. Thanks for watching and listening to this edition of Political Update from Atlanta News First.